US, there were 3 ingredients that were needed to create the toxic mRNA shots. And these 3 ingredients are the PrEP Act, the OTAs, which are the other transaction agreements, and then the EUA, which is the Emergency Use Authorization. And we discussed that with you and with Debbie. We talked about that at length. And in Europe, however, in the European Union, there is no PrEP Act. There are no OTAs. There is something like an EUA, an Emergency Use Authorization, but it wasn't used to create these shots. And I'm going to interview Sasha today because she will discuss in detail how the mRNA shots were embedded into a framework that allowed them to be produced. And I think that will be interesting for Americans to see how it was done in Europe, and also for Europeans who probably have no idea about how this was done. What do you think, Sasha? How many people know about this?
Very few people know about this. People still don't understand, and actually on both sides. In the alternative and dissenting health side, majority of people still don't realize that this is how it was done. They still think it was some sort of a mistake, rushed pharmaceutical product, and blame pharma for everything. But that's not what happened.
Yeah. Yes, and I also think it will never happen again. Hopefully, fingers crossed. This was some weird thing, and we better forget about it as soon as as quickly as we can, and everybody else will hopefully do the same. Yes. Before we go into how it was done in Europe, I would like you to just give a really brief overview to refresh everyone's memory how it was done here. So tell, in a sentence or two, what's the PrEP Act, what's the OTAs, what's the EUA, and what did each part specifically accomplish to achieve the goal?
Yeah, so in the U.S., the PrEP Act, which has been part of U.S. law since 2005, was used for this purpose. And the PrEP Act allows the government to announce an emergency such as a pandemic. It's not limited to only pandemics, but in this case, the government can announce pandemic. Very importantly, people don't understand that there is no justification needed for this announcement. No data is required. No proofs are necessary. There is no need to have any virus existing or not existing. These announcements are made solely on the opinion of one unelected government bureaucrat, specifically HHS secretary. In this case, right now, it's RFK Jr. At the time that the first announcement was made, it was Alex Azar under first Trump administration. And so that person writes a memo to Federal Register saying, I believe there are circumstances exist that justify national emergency of public health because of this pandemic virus. That's all. Nothing else is needed. That memo goes into the Federal Register and it triggers into place this whole structure. Now, the PrEP Act is particularly, it's deeply unconstitutional. It was deemed unconstitutional when it was passed. So it's an act of treason, really, by Congress at the time who passed this act. It strips U.S. citizens of our constitutionally protected rights under auspices of a pretend pandemic. Pretend because it doesn't require any justification. It's just an announcement. So they make an announcement, they suspend the Constitution. It has a net effect. So it's equivalent. So these announcements are equivalent of announcing a war on U.S. soil. So we're invaded, guys. This is how serious this is. And it's a nationwide, as I said. And PrEP Act preempts all the state laws that may exist related to these issues. So it preempts all the state law. It preempts our constitutional rights. It allows introduction of EUA countermeasures, which is, it's a military term, again, because this is equivalent to announcing a war. They're saying, and we can use countermeasures for whatever attack is. And these countermeasures include these so-called pharmaceutical products, although under PrEP Act, EUAs are actually not considered pharmaceuticals, not considered medical products. They're just blanket term countermeasures, very, very vague term, undefined term. And if pharmaceutical and medical products or actions, treatments, protocols fall under this EUA countermeasure. They don't have to be compliant with any medical, pharmaceutical, consumer protection regulations whatsoever. It's explicitly waived in the US law. And they can be adulterated and they can be misbranded. So it's okay to lie about it. So right here, we have a structure that says, we say there is a pandemic, and now all of a sudden, no laws apply to us whatsoever, and there's no liability whatsoever. So
right, and it's not even just there is a pandemic; it's also a potential risk of a pandemic, or
potential risk of
you
a
know,
pandemic. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can say, well, maybe asteroid will hit the Earth at some point. There's a potential risk of that. Let's announce a public health emergency, and now we're going to use all kinds of products, actions, activities, censorship, propaganda, everything. None of it has to comply with any regulations that people expect, and we can lie about it freely, and we're not violating any law. This
right,
is
and
what
nobody can sue for anybody,
nobody can.
anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So what about the OTAs? What was that? And
yeah, so the OTA was more it's a funding mechanism. So other transaction authority, it's a way of contracting between government and private sector that avoids all regulation that otherwise exists for government contracting, which is pretty extensive. So originally it was introduced only for NASA, and the justification, as usual, justification was given that, well, if NASA is building a spaceship and there are seat belts on that spaceship, they don't have to comply with the same laws that consumer grade car seat belts have to. Okay, that seems reasonable. So we're going to put it through OTA, so they don't have to be in compliance with all this other stuff. But then over time, it of course expanded in scope, and now 11 government agencies or even more are using OTAs. And OTAs are most typically used for military purchasing today. Military purchasing because it avoids disclosure, it avoids regulations, avoids IP disclosure. So you can buy secret technologies with money. Also avoids competition requirements. So the competitive bidding. So you can award these chronic contracts for gazillions of dollars. For otherwise, if you were put it into competitive bid, it would probably be like 1/100th of a cost. But this is how they can allocate humongous amounts of money to the secret technologies and avoid accountability. And so this is all of the COVID products, vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, procedures, hospitals, all that. There were hundreds and hundreds of contracts given by the US government. The total bill was something like 4 trillion at the end of the day. And all of it went through OTA. So all of it went from DoD using other transaction authority contracting to all these companies. So no competition. They just sprayed money liberally onto their preferred vendors and purchased all these things secretly, avoiding all disclosure.
right, and it was done by the Department of Defense because they, in contrast to other agencies, have not only research and development OTAs, but also manufacturing or prototype manufacturing OTAs, correct?
Yeah, so the vaccines were famously purchased, and this came up through Brooke Jackson's litigation against Pfizer. Pfizer was forced to produce one of these contracts, and subsequently a whole bunch of them got FOIA'd. And in this contract, the DoD ordered from Pfizer these vaccines as prototypes and demonstrations. And actually, when I reviewed a number of these contracts myself, and most of them say these things like, we're buying this prototype demonstration test, large-scale manufacturing demonstration. So all of them were bought as demonstrations, meaning fakes. So you don't have to comply. You don't have to do anything. You just need to demonstrate something.
Okay, and now the EUA, the Emergency Use Authorization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the EUAs are, as I said, they get issued actually, technically when these announcements are made of different emergencies under PrEP Act, they automatically kind of authorize EUA countermeasures because they only can exist under an existing PrEP Act declaration for emergency. Otherwise, you cannot have an EUA. So what people don't realize, they think that EUA is kind of like it's a light approval, or FDA reviews some data, looks at the clinical trial and then says, well, it's not quite, we're going to continue monitoring this clinical trial, but we will, for emergency reasons, issue this emergency use authorization. So that it's also it's like worded such that people think, well, it's for emergency, we authorize it, but we continue monitoring, and eventually it becomes a full approval. And this is how it was sold to the public. So, like, remember, they issued EUAs in December, and then in August of 2021, FDA said, well, now we have a full approval. But all of this is a lie. That's not how the law is written. This is how the FDA is manipulating the public and lying about it. But as I said, they're allowed to. The law allows them to lie about this. In reality, EUA never requires any clinical trial data. In fact, it's not possible to actually do a legal, lawful clinical trial for an EUA. This is how the law is written. They're in completely separated from each other. So EUA is literally, EUA, first of all, it says it's a non-investigational use or non-investigational product, or non-investigational use of a investigational product or non-investigational product to begin with. And so because the mRNA vaccines were never on the market in any capacity, they are non-investigational chemical substances. Just the word non-investigational in law means that you cannot have a clinical trial, because clinical trial is a human subject protected investigation. So once you declare something investigational, all pharmaceutical laws apply to you. If it's by definition non-investigational, you can't be in compliance with pharmaceutical law, because pharmaceutical law is written for investigational products only.
Right, and that also explains why with an EUA they say that you don't end up with a bunch of data that you can look at and come to any conclusions about the effectiveness or the dangers connected with this drug or whatever it is.
Yeah, so you can't, because you cannot. So you can't have a clinical trial for a non-investigational, like you can't have a clinical trial for bullets. They're non-investigational. So the same thing, you can't have an investigation for intentional poison, because it's an intentional poison. And so they designate them as non-investigational, bullets and poisons, and then they proceed authorizing them for market, which is a lie. They're just deploying them on the public. And the EUA is also, as I said, the law is explicit. The products that are under EUA for the duration of PrEP Act can be adulterated, can be misbranded, and there is no liability for anyone manufacturing, distributing, or using them, as long as they follow HHS directions.
Yes, yeah. And there still were clinical trials conducted by Pfizer and others, but they were just like show trials. Because I don't know how many people would have taken the shots if they had said, well, it's an EUA, emergency use authorization, and oh, by the way, we didn't do any trials. I don't think anybody would have lined up. So they had to have some sort of trials, but they were, if I understand it correctly, completely meaningless. Although for the public, for the public, it was like a show trial, like producing the impression of a proper trial with proper results that justified the trust into this allegedly safe and effective vaccine.
Yes, exactly. So they were done specifically just to convince the public that everything is being done properly, that these are tested. But again, in the U.S. law and in the internal presentations that I've disclosed from FDA lawyers have written up their opinions, it's very, very clear. Clinical trials have never had any impact on FDA's decision to deploy these products. And also, to date, all the courts have adjudicated this statement that I just made. All the courts have agreed with me that clinical trials have never had any material impact on FDA's decision to deploy these products or government's decision to deploy these products. Because, as I said, they're irrelevant. And the pharma companies can do whatever studies they want to do. This technically, what the Pfizer and Moderna did were illegal human experiments, but they had no impact on the decision to deploy these things. They were going on the market no matter what.
Does it mean that the current mRNA COVID shots are still under EUA?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. As I said, until the PrEP Act declaration is revoked by HHS secretary or by president or by Congress, these things remain EUA, because you cannot switch from a non-investigational to investigational without going back and now doing, the proper clinical trials for investigational product collection.
Exactly, which would take years in all likelihood, right? They would take a long time.
Well, first of all, it would take years if you were going to do it, but actually you can't even do it anymore because there's extensive evidence that these are poisons and killing people, and you can't ethically involve people in testing known poison. Okay, so that's why you can't actually do it anymore.
Yeah, that's true. Although they had planned to do such a trial. I remember when a couple of months ago, RFK stopped a trial with like 10,000 people for some new mRNA shot, and he said, "No, we're not going to do this." They just abandoned it. It had been planned during the Biden administration. But okay, so the EUA is the EU. The purpose of the EUA is to get all around all these FDA regulations, and OTA also gets around regulations, and the PrEP Act gets around all sorts of laws and regulations. So all these things, just we have the millions and who knows unlimited number of rules and regulations in this country, and so that people think everything we can be safe and we are protected. Nothing could be further from the truth, because there are all these other legal concepts that will just take the axe and slash through the laws and the regulations and just put them to the side for this particular thing, or give an exemption for this particular thing. And these are enormous exemptions.
Yeah.
So now the question is, how was this done in Europe?
Right. So in Europe and in other countries of the world, there's no PrEP Act, and they did it via, I call it synthetic PrEP Act for EU, because in other countries they've utilized different other laws, and importantly the contracts that countries had to sign to create the net effect of the PrEP Act. So the same structures which it puts the country onto the war footing and implements a whole bunch of security measures and protocols, and then waives all the consumer protections and rules while lying to the public about it. And so that's kind of how it happened in the EU. I started looking into it when there was a leak of documents from European Medicines Agency around the time of launch of these products in EU at the end of 2020, and that was published in British Medical Journal. And so British Medical Journal actually authenticated the leak and determined that it was authentic data, and actually got statements from European Medicines Agency who did not deny that these are real documents. And with the documents, so there were maybe 1,000 pages of Pfizer documentation, manufacturing documentation that was released, and about a dozen different emails between staff of the European Medicines Agency and some high-profile officials in the EU, and also in MHRA, which is a UK regulator. And so that became the basis for me of realizing what actually happened. So those were very useful emails. And what happened is in the EU there are two mechanisms of putting the drugs on the market. One.
Oh yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. We'll go into that, but before we go there, You said that it was leaked in November 2020, just when all these decisions were being made, and it was published in a British scientific journal.
British
Which one was
Medical
that
Journal.
again? British Medical Journal. How was it received? Was it picked up by the press? Was there a lot of media attention to it?
Wasn't a lot of media attention. I mean, there was some media attention, but not like nothing particularly, widespread. Yeah, there were a couple of articles in British Medical Journal. Some of the alternative people picked it up. The problem is that even the dissenting side. Well, I was nobody at the time. I had very small media presence. I was banned everywhere, and even on the dissenting side, people didn't go into the trouble of actually reading all of it and trying to connect. So, to my knowledge, I was the first person who actually fully read the 1,000 pages of Pfizer manufacturing.
No kidding! You were the first person, and
Well,
you read all the thousand documents.
I read the whole 1,000 pages, and so it was the review document for manufacturing. This is the only manufacturing piece of information that we have to date. Period. And there were several European Medicines Agency reviewers notes and opinions in there, and a bunch of like PowerPoint presentations from internal meetings. This is very, very useful. So at the time also, I didn't know much about mRNA manufacturing. Nobody did. So I read it and I was like, well, you got to be kidding me. So I found a couple of very important things. For example, the thing that was picked up by several, including the British Medical Journal, several outlets, was this whole concept of a broken mRNA in the vials that European Medicine Agency reviewers identified as a major issue, major objection to the approval. And a British Medical Journal wrote about that. Yeah, so what it tells us about mRNA instability. So they picked up that issue, and I also discussed that issue, and that issue has not been resolved since.
Yes, I just started sharing my screen, and this is the article about this EMA leak.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah, and they focused on the mRNA instability, which is a known problem. To date, to my knowledge, a number of sequencing exercises have been done from vials. The first one I published on was done in Germany by Vanessa Schmidt-Kruger, and she published her findings, and I also republished her findings, demonstrating. And this is from the internal PowerPoint from the EMA reviewers. So as you can see, they have identified, in these horizontal, so the numbers, the letters and numbers on the horizontal lines are batch numbers. And there are various, there are two types of things. So first they make active substance, and there's a batch for active substance. And then there's other ingredient. Active substance is mRNA, and other ingredients are lipid nanoparticles and vehicle and things. And that's the second drug product batch number. And you can see that where on the column where it says mean percent RNA integrity, it varies quite a bit. So you can see, and they're listing also the company where that batch came from, because Pfizer has a whole bunch of suppliers of these things. And you can see that mRNA integrity was ranging from 80%, 86% for the high to the low of 55%. Meaning
that, Sasha, say again, what is the difference between the purple here, the drug substance batch number, and the drug product batch number?
So drug substance is active ingredient mRNA. So they make synthetic piece of molecule, they call it mRNA. And and that's formulated separately as a active substance. And then they make other ingredients as a vehicle to create the LNP. And then they put them together, and that's the drug product.
Okay, so the drug product is what was injected into people.
Yeah, drug product is what gets injected into people. Yes,
right.
And substance is substance. And what they found, as you can see in this column, which says percent RNA integrity, they can test it in the substance. They can also test it in the final product. And as you can see, they'll make it in the substance, it's higher percent to, they test integrity, meaning do we have that piece, that lone piece of RNA that we're supposed to have, which is 3,000 something nucleotides. So they test and they say, well, do we have that piece of code floating in our solution? And turns out in these ones, in the substance, they have anywhere from 86% of these pieces are to the code, to like full length and to the code. Sometimes it's as low as 62% though, so that failed. Meaning 20% is just broken pieces. And that's what the reviewers will find. And then in the final product, it's worse because, well, in the substance, they just freshly made it. By the time it's made into the product, a bunch of it broke. Then it also breaks and degrades when it sits on the shelf. So that's what the reviewers found. They found that in some batches, it was as low as 55%.
Right. So you have, so in some you have like 55% of this RNA, and then you have all sorts of junk where it's not really clear what all these broken pieces and other stuff. It's not really clear what that even is. Two questions here. First of all, the highest RNA integrity here is 86 down here, and here it's what, 80. It's also 86.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that? I mean, I have no idea. Is that good? Is that bad? I mean, it's not 100%.
Nobody knows. Well, first of all, historically, the belief was that you need to be as close to 100% as possible, which would make sense, right? If you theorize that this piece of, whatever that piece of code is, it's some sort of life-saving, because all of these are gene therapies, so they make the same claim, this is the genetic code that we need to deliver to your cells so that your cells can make the good protein or the good whatever, so we can replace the bad genes with the good genes. This all of that nonsense is predicated on you actually making that code to whatever you say it's supposed to be and as close to 100% as possible. And previous belief in gene therapy science literature that I read was, you need to have in excess of 90% to have your therapeutic benefit. Another reason for that is that only very, very few cells actually can get transfected in principle with this stuff. And so they try to get it as high as possible, as high fidelity to the code that they need to deliver. So in principle, in theory, the gene therapy science literature says that you need to be as close to 100% as possible and somewhere like 90 to 100% range. Now here, we're seeing, and that's what also in the British Medical Journal article they wrote, they asked some experts, and that's the experts' opinion was to what I just described. Now you look at this, and this is why the European Medicines Agency reviewers were making a big issue out of it, appropriately. This was one of the major objections they brought up in November 2020, objecting to Pfizer's approval in the EU. Based on this, they were saying this is nowhere close to what you're saying this code is supposed to be. And well, first of all, it's not anywhere like higher than 90%. It has as low as 55%, and we don't know what those broken pieces are and what they're going to do when they get transfected into the cells.
Yes, exactly.
So that was their argument. Now, my personal opinion, you get this close to 100%, you will be killing even more people because that whole code is poison. Okay, but fine.
Yes. Exactly. That was my next question. Namely, is it now with hindsight of all what has happened during the last 4 years, would you say you actually lucked out if you got one of these really low ones with 55% RNA integrity? Or can you?
Yeah, there was some data indicating that. I actually also published on it. In 2022, when I was looking into, I got the data for batches. So from those 1,000 pages, there were some commercial batches listed. So here you see at the bottom, the green ones highlighted, ED, those were already commercial. The other ones were research ones. I got about 30 some batches, commercial batches with their RNA integrity percentage. And I looked at the deaths and injury rates for those batches. And it turns out that, the higher the higher the RNA integrity was, the more lethal they were, because it is poison. So I
Wow,
called it,
that is
yeah,
very interesting.
yeah, I called it broken bioweapon is safer. Yeah, so broken bioweapon turned out to be safer. But RNA is not the only problem in these things. There's like so
Right.
many other problematic LNPs by themselves are very dangerous. So there's many other mechanisms in it for people to be killed. But the tendency was, in the correlation, the statistical correlation was the higher RNA, the more toxic batch.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's kind of ironic, right? That these results here that the people at the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, saw was cause for great alarm among them. They said, "Wait a minute, something is wrong here. The drug product actually is way of lesser quality." They must have thought, because it has this high variability in RNA integrity and also lower RNA integrity. But it actually later turned out that you do not want to have 100% RNA integrity at all. Of course, that was not what they would have known. That also wasn't their job. Their job was to look at to do these what are called these CMC controls, and we'll go into this. Yeah. So that was. I'm going to stop sharing here for now. But this document here was among the leaked documents in November 2020, before the decision had been made. That was leaked before the decision had been made when to release about the timeline, correct?
Yes. So they this was released some like November 29th, so 30th of 2020. And the decision was made in early December, like December 10th or 11th, in EU, to launch these products. So as I said, now we know that this whole they were lying to the FDA and EMA staffers too. So they were making them do all this work, looking at the review, producing the opinions, writing it up on a very tight schedule. Everybody was working 24/7. And all of it mattered zero to the approval. The European Medicines Agency reviewers wrote up several objections. They were also specified in those emails that were leaked. They were described in these documents. One of them was this RNA integrity. Another one was that Pfizer was not good manufacturing practice compliant at all, not even close. And there were also a lot of missing data and information that reviewers needed to make a decision, and Pfizer never produced it. So, in addition to those major objections, there were about 100 of they called observations, concerns, various regulatory flags raised by the reviewers. But again, as I said, none of this mattered for the approval, because these products were going to be deployed no matter what as EUA countermeasures.
So I just put up the website for the European Medicines Agency, this EMA, and the EMA is roughly equivalent to the FDA in the United
the
States.
same as FDA in the US, yeah.
Right. And it says here, so it's a decentralized agency of the European Union. It is responsible for the scientific evaluation, supervision, and safety monitoring of medicines. It doesn't mention vaccines anywhere here. So,
yeah, they claim vaccines and medicines. So they regulate.
Oh, I see.
They regulate vaccines in Europe.
They claim that those are medicines. Interesting. All right. So this is the EMA, and tell me what the EMA what was the job of the EMA with regard to these mRNA shots?
Well, just like in the US, the FDA role, the EMA role for Europe was to play act this as a regulatory approval for the public to have confidence in these shots and line up for them. So it's a critical role. In US, FDA continues to play this role, and in Europe, EMA continues to play this role. They're lying to the public and telling that these are safe and effective while they're actually poisons.
And one of their jobs was to do these CMCs, these chemical manufacturing controls. Now, you have 25 years of experience in pharmaceutical research and development. You know all about chemical manufacturing controls. Tell me about those. Tell me how important they are.
Yeah, so CMC, so chemistry manufacturing controls, is a major part of regulatory approval of any medicine. And in the US or in Europe or anywhere in the Western world. It's so the chemistry and then safety and efficacy. Those are three parts of normal regulatory approval that you have to hit. And the main focus of the reviewers is actually on the chemistry, because if you can't demonstrate that your manufacturing process is compliant with good manufacturing practice law, and you have the controls, then you can't demonstrate that you make what you claim you're making. The problem with medicines and pharmaceuticals is that you can't determine by sight, smell, unlike picking a fruit in the store, you can't actually determine what's in the vial. You have to trust the label. And so all this regulation revolves around trusting the label, both for the consumer and for the healthcare provider. We have extensive laws governing how you're supposed to do it. And for something that's, for standard things, there's like pharmacology standard practices. So sometimes you see USP or European Farm Standard. That means that it's something standard, like making an aspirin or making saline solution or making, basic things that have been well characterized and understood are standardized, and it's written into US Pharmacopoeia standard or European pharmaceutical standards. For these mRNA shots, none of it is, except maybe with like saline that they use for dilution, none of the other ingredients are standards. They're all newly invented. If something is completely newly invented, you as an inventor of that thing actually has to invent all the control mechanisms to make sure that whatever in each step of manufacturing, of which these products involve hundreds of steps of manufacturing, in each step of manufacturing, you produced what you thought you were going to produce, and you removed all the contaminants and in-process materials from it. And again. So, and as I said, when the European Medicines Agency reviewers received that file, a whole bunch of it was missing. A majority of the standards that Pfizer was testing, like saying, if I make RNA substance, how do I test for whether it's complete or broken into pieces? Even that part, the European Medicines Agency had to rely on Pfizer's own testing methods, which is a problem because who is checking?
Well, they should be the ones who are checking.
But they don't. There's no method. There's no method to check for it. Like all of it is just kind of amorphous science, proprietary science. Pfizer says, well, we have historically tested this way, and the European Medicines Agency has no real third-party verified mechanism, and they say, okay, it sounds plausible to me or reasonable to me, and so I'm going to go ahead with what you're saying. But what I'm saying, this is a very, very iffy regulatory situation to begin with, because we have all these unknowns, a bunch of black holes, a bunch of stuff hasn't been invented yet. Some of the things that Pfizer is using are, maybe okay, maybe not okay. So, for example, they can't really tell you like, well, let's not go into science. But as I'm saying, for this completely new stuff, there was no standards, proprietary methods for the most part, proprietary unverified methods that regulators didn't have any way to verify themselves. They had to go with what Pfizer reported to them. And that's why they were raising all these concerns. They were saying, this is not at all, we're not comfortable with it at all.
Wow. So this is awful. So what you're basically saying is that these CMCs, these chemical manufacturing controls, are pretty iffy anyway. You can't really rely on them because the CMA and it's probably similar here in the United States, the CMA doesn't really, it has to rely on what the manufacturer, so pharma, the pharmaceutical company like Pfizer, tells them.
Well, they in normal circumstances, when you're doing a normal drug approval, it's the regulators will push back and they will say, if you're saying this method is to check for this integrity or for this step, well, you have to validate it. So when the manufacturer validates it, that becomes much more approvable, much more comfortable for everyone to say, okay, this is a good methodology. But in Pfizer's case, in these mRNA shots, nothing was validated. They're just taking kind of like a scientific methods, and scientific methods are not acceptable for consumer safety regulations. It's just science. You're just playing science. You need to validate it.
So validated in a trial.
Validated in a trial. So, for example, for a whole bunch of this, they rely on PCR. And PCR is not validated for anything. It's a scientific lab tool. It's not diagnostic. So anyway, so what I'm saying, you can use proprietary methods for invention. Once you've invented something and you want to put it into large mass consumer production, you have to validate those scientific steps, and they haven't done that. And to date, they have not done that.
Okay. So they have these. So the job of the EMA is to do these chemical manufacturing controls for anything that needs approval. And in this case, it wasn't done in the usual way. They didn't validate it.
They didn't.
So and that must have been very. I imagine when you work for the EMA, that would have been pretty upsetting to see what was going on there. And now this is exactly where the EMA was pressured, and apparently very heavily, by people higher up in the chain. And I want to in the European Union's in the European Union, I mean by the EU Commissioner for Food, Health, and something, and probably all the way up to the President of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen. So I'm going to share my screen again, because you put together these great screenshots from the emails that you found in the leaked documents, and they are extremely interesting.
Yeah.
They are really extremely interesting, and whoever is the whistleblower here, or whoever is the leaker here, I wish this person would come forward. First of all, thank you very much for leaking it. That was a great service, and maybe consider going public and telling us more. Okay, so let's go to this. All right, so let's have a look here. What could we start with? Maybe we should first have a look at this, Sasha, because these are the top, the what you call the top players in EMA, to get familiar with the names that are being used in the emails.
I extracted into this PowerPoint. I went and extracted all the names that were mentioned in the emails. And to the extent that I could find their photos and who they are. And the key players were, so Marco Cavalieri is heavily involved. And a lot of emails are from him and to him. So he was the chair of COVID-19 EMA pandemic task force. Then Emma Cook is mentioned quite a bit. And so she was the executive director of the EMA. So she's the boss of pretty much all of these people. Now, the Noel Wassion was the person who was actually concerned about how completely unmanaged this was and all the quality. But he conveniently retired in June of 2021. These other people are like. So they were more implementers, I would say, Alexis and Fergus, and Agnes Saint Ramon is also in one of the higher level email exchanges. So all of these people I've extracted. Stella Kyriakidis was mentioned several times. She was at the time health and Food Safety Commissioner in the EU. And so throughout the PowerPoint, in general, from this total of 1,000 pages, I extracted about 60 names, 60-some names and emails of people who were involved. And majority of the reviewers were from France and Sweden. So France and Sweden were designated, they call them co-rapporteurs, or like they will designate two countries in the EU, their chemistry and pharmacology experts as reviewers. And so this was primarily done through Swedish and French reviewers.
Actually, Sasha, you extracted more names than that, considerably more. I went in the article that you wrote on your Substack on the Synthetic PrEP Act. There is a link to the database with the names that you extracted from the 1,000 pages, and I went and looked at it, and I counted 127 names.
Oh, yeah.
Not all of them have emails, but 127 names, and a bunch of them have emails.
Yeah.
So, wow, this is great work to just go in there and see that. And if anybody wants to do it, try to find people who are willing to talk about what happened there. Not everyone still works at the EMA. One interesting thing about Noel is, we are going to look at least one of his emails, very interesting email that he wrote to his team. So he was a deputy executive director. So he was the second in line after Marco Cavalieri. And he retired in June of 2021. Unfortunately, he died in August of 2023. So it is not possible to ask him and to talk to him. He was very upset about what was going on, I think, not only from the email, but based on something else that happened later, a little bit later in December 2020 with the AstraZeneca mRNA vaccine. And we're going to look at that as well. And about Emma Cook, that is very, very interesting with her. I looked her up on LinkedIn, and I'm going to show you what I found. Where is she? I think she's here. Yeah, there she is, Emma Cook. And she is still at EMA, and she is still the executive director as she was then. But what is really interesting is, look at this date here. She became the executive director of EMA in November 2020. So she must have just started working there, because these emails are from, I don't know, the first one is something like 11th of November, something like that. She must have just started working there. And what I find very interesting is, look where she worked before. She worked for the WHO in a high position as the director of medical products regulation. And then she was hired by the EMA. And I mean, I'm just speculating, and tell me what you think, but maybe one reason she was hired at exactly this point in time, that because people knew that EMA would voice objections to what was going on here, and they needed someone in place who would help them steamroll EMA.
Yes, exactly. That was her role.
Yeah. Okay. And since we just talked about Noël Vatillon, let's just have a look at this article here that I found in the Daily Mail. So that was a little bit later. That's the 30th December 2020. And look at this here. EU bureaucracy is accused of costing lives after European regulators, so that's EMA, said they cannot approve the Oxford vaccine before February. It doesn't really say who was accusing them. It's just, they are accused of costing lives. But here, the deputy executive director, which is Noël, here is Noël. He was accused of costing lives. He said it was unlikely officials would be able to give the jab the green light next month. And look what he said. He said, we are not just going to give approval based on a press release that they have sent out to themselves. Which is what they like to do. So here he is. And it also says, if you go a little bit further down, yes, he said the company must first demonstrate that all vaccines will be of high quality. Good point. And then he added that the pharmaceutical firm AstraZeneca, and those shots were withdrawn pretty early on because they were so dangerous and led to lots of clotting issues, has still not submitted. Look at this. Has still not submitted a formal application for its jab to be approved.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't even submitted this yet. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and he's already being accused of costing lives.
Exactly. And then it says, and look at this, the EU has already bought 400 million doses of the jab while awaiting regulatory approval.
Yeah, exactly. And it was the same in the US. The US government already bought the vaccines before there was any approval and before anybody submitted any regulatory documents, no matter how badly written. And so he's pointing out to this fact that the order's already placed. They're issuing press releases saying these things are going to get approved. He's being accused of costing life. He hasn't seen the application. Right?
Yes, it hasn't been submitted yet. I mean, this just says all this other stuff, all this regulatory stuff is just for show.
Mm-hmm.
It's just for show. That's all it is. It doesn't. It's going to be twisted in such a way to get the result that they want. They already bought the stuff. The job is already done.
Mm-hmm.
It's all complete. It really is completely devious. But then, because when you read the sentence as a reader of the Daily Mail, you might think, wait a minute, does that make sense? Why did they already buy this if it's still awaiting regulatory approval?
Mm-hmm.
But then look at the bias in this article. I mean, look at the media bias, but at the glacial pace at which the EMA operates, bad EMA, so bureaucratic, and of course, the EU is terribly bureaucratic and it's a valid criticism. So they're using something that usually is a valid criticism and turned it around here where it actually is not a valid criticism because the EMA was trying to do its job, which involves consulting experts in all 27 member states. Imagine that. It has frustrated several governments. And then I thought this was really interesting. Look at this. It was only thanks to pressure from Germany that the EMA approved the Pfizer BioNTech jab earlier than expected on December 21st.
Yeah.
Wow. So, let's have a look at the pressure. Let's have a look at the pressure that was put on these guys. Where do you want to start?
Right.
You want to start here?
Yeah, this is interesting because, just as we were talking about the chemistry manufacturing controls, so in one of the emails, or several emails actually, a lot of emails dealt with that. And so he's saying already this is November 10th, and they're saying that I just learned from FDA that there are some issues on CMC, which is chemistry, manufacturing, and controls, to be sorted out. And so they're just saying, we heard from FDA. They haven't seen anything. They're like, oh, FDA told us there are some issues, but it will be fine. Then it's important to further push the CMC assessors. So they're trying to pressure people who are not fools, who are professionals, who can immediately detect that all of this stuff is just nonsense. So they want to push them politically and put a lot of pressure on them to fold and allow this to go through. And this is what Noel Wassion was upset about.
Yeah, so this is what Irene Raga wrote to Marco. I mean, she says, well, this would be important to further push to further. So they were already pushing them, it seems. And the CMC assessors, they work for EMA, correct?
Yes, the CMC assessors are experts that prepare reviews, the reviewers,
Yes, so they had already pushed them, obviously, because to further. Now they want to push them even further. And then she also adds, who obviously came back challenging a more strict timeline. What is this here, TT?
Yeah, I think it's
for the first CMC round. So this is what she wrote to the head of the Office of the Biological Health Threats and Vaccine Strategy at EMA. And he agrees, saying that I fear CMC will end up being the difficult bit. So I guess, what does that mean, Sasha? Is he referring to the CMC assessors who are going to dig in and say, no, we are not going to go along with
it? So that's the worry, because it's easy to snow the public. It's much harder to snow the professionals. And so that's what they're worried about, that the professionals are going to poke holes. And obviously the leak happened from somebody who was very upset about what's going on. And likely one of the assessors or somebody who knew about this and who understood what was going on, that they're being railroaded and pushed to approve unapprovable.
So I would guess then, given all this, that the leaker there might be a decent chance that it is one of the CMC assessors that you have listed in your document.
Probably, yeah, probably.
Yeah. Okay. So this is Tuesday, 10/11. So that was the 10th of November. I think this is the European.
Yes, European, yeah.
This is the European. Okay. So let's go to the next email here, which is from, let's make it bigger. Oh, this actually doesn't have a date, but it must be in November 2020 at some, not sure which day.
Yeah, it's also from November. It doesn't have a date. Here it was funny that he's telling about that Pfizer CEO Burla was bullying Peter Marks and lying to the European reviewers in saying that the EMA wants the approval even faster than the FDA. So Burla was running a lot of this bullying, which is very strange to me. Like in normal pharma circumstances, this wouldn't happen. How does he have so much power to push these people around and to lie to them openly? I mean, they caught him in a lie here. And they're upset and they're saying, well, we need to coordinate our messaging better so he can't snow us like this.
Yeah, that's right. And you can also see how they were all looking at harmonizing the timeline between the United States, so the FDA, and Britain, despite of Brexit, and the EU.
Yeah, and
so all three.
And this is all they're concerned in all these emails is timeline. When are we going to approve? So they're just concerned about coordinating timelines. Nobody has seen the data, and they don't care about the data.
Yes, and we'll see that in one of the next emails. Also interesting, I think, is this down here from Moderna. They plan to submit EUA application end of November and could follow a similar pattern or even faster, as CMC seems to be more straightforward. So why would CMC be more straightforward?
I don't know. Presumably they use the same manufacturing process as Pfizer. And another thing, nobody has ever seen Moderna's manufacturing documents. But I do have connections to internal whistleblowers at Moderna. And I know that their manufacturing was way worse than Pfizer, way worse. And they missed a bunch of deadlines and they couldn't scale up their manufacturing. So I don't know why he's saying it's more straightforward. In my opinion, my guess is that because Moderna is a U.S. government company, U.S. government military CIA company, they're not a private company. They were saying, well, the U.S. government takes care of it. So, that's why they think it's more straightforward.
Right. And then he added the sentence here, for us, this may take a bit longer, because we want to do our job here at EMA. But colleagues are pushing hard. To compress review time frame.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to the next email. Somebody should write a thriller about this,
Yeah.
Here we go. No, not this one. Maybe we can introduce this topic here.
Go to the next.
Let's do that.
No, go to the next.
Go to this one.
Yeah,
okay.
We'll address that one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So
this is a good one.
This one is very interesting because this is amongst high-level officials of FDA, of EMA, UK MHRA. And so you see the EMA head of international affairs, Agnes. So she's coordinating with the other regulators. And so they're saying that the pressure is coming from Trump So coming from Alex Azar, and first they were like, "Who is Alex Azar?" Then they figured out he's the HHS secretary at the time.
Yeah. Actually, that's really. I thought it
It's
was really funny.
right?
So it's our good old friend Noel. He says he reads here. Oh, faster to be faster than Christmas. Cavalieri writes, but pushed hard by Azar and U.S. government. And then a few minutes later, 1 minute later, Noel replies, Azar is what? And he probably thinks it's some sort of acronym, some sort of agency or sub-agency or something. and then Agnes Saint-Raymond, she replies, well, U.S. Health Secretary.
Yeah, U.S. Health Secretary, and then they're saying, "Oh yeah, he's under Trump, and Trump is pushing hard for these timelines." So obviously, Trump was already lost election at the time, but they're saying he's still very much involved and still very much pushing for the approval faster than Christmas. So again,
Yes.
like people saying, "Oh, Fauci lied to Pfizer to Trump, and Fauci is responsible." No, Trump was pushing for this, and he still is in love with these shots. He was in charge of Operation Warp Speed. He was behind all of this. He knew exactly what they were doing, and he's fully in the know on this genocide. So like, stop whitewashing him.
Yeah, it's in this date here. This was the 16th of November. This was just a few days after the 2020 election, and the country really was in turmoil at that time because it wasn't clear. I mean, it was clear that something weird had gone on with this election, and so this comment here, Azar is pro-Trump and still under his influence. Or Azar, rather, yeah. Okay, and then they have this phone call there to prepare for EU XCSG on Wednesday. Do you know what that is? Executive
Steering group, probably.
Steering group on Wednesday, and then on Thursday they have a telephone call with the commissioner, which I guess is Stella, the commissioner. The feasibility, and now look at this sentence here, the feasibility to adapt the CMA to these extraordinary circumstances will be key for determining the approach.
Yes, exactly. So this is how they did the synthetic PrEP Act. So this
Yeah.
to that.
You know, it reminded me of the PANCAP adapted.
Yes. So the US adapted PANCAPA, and they're adapting CMA. So we can cover what that adaptation involves.
Yes, there was the pandemic crisis action plan adapted that was used in the United States, where the National Security Council was put in charge of the response to COVID. All right, so that was this email here, and then we have. So the most interesting, I think, is this one here, and that's written by Noel. So let's have a look, and then you can walk us through this. There's a ton in this email here.
Yeah, so as far as I could tell, Noel was the only, well, not the only, but as far as the key executives of EMA, he was the only one who was worried that they're reckless and they're approving the unapprovable and being pushed to do that. And he's voicing his concerns here in this email, saying that they have these expectations for very speedy approvals, but we need to do our job, and we need to make sure that these things actually safe. And the key focus is, again, on manufacturing, because if you can't demonstrate that you're manufacturing what you're saying you're manufacturing, it's not safe, no matter what your science says. So that was his focus, and he was voicing concerns, and then I guess he was either pushed to retire or he was planning to retire, and then subsequently he died quickly afterwards. So
yes, and by the way, there's no cause of death given. I actually looked. I looked at his obituary. I looked at lots of articles that wrote about him. EMA wrote an obituary for him as well. I couldn't find any cause of death. He was 66. He retired at 64, which I think is probably pretty normal retirement age. But yeah, I would have liked to know why he died. So this email apparently was written right after they had a telephone call. So since Alexis and Monica were no longer connected when we had our short discussion after today, so they had a short discussion after today's telephone call with the commissioner. So that must have been Stella, the top of because EMA, the top of the head of EMA reports to the commissioner of food and health and whatever else it was. So this is Stella Kiri. She has a complicated name, Kirika Kiris or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So, and he says, a brief summary of what I already said, together with some additional reflections. I'm so glad she wrote this. So good that Alexis and Monica were no longer connected. So look at this here. As a minimum, we can say that the telephone call was interesting. The atmosphere was rather tense, at times even a bit unpleasant, and provides a hint on what EMA may expect if the expectations are not being met, irrespective if such expectations are realistic or not. Wow.
Yeah.
So they had a hostile telephone call. EMA was there as well. Cook, here she is. EMA Cook. She must have been in the telephone call, and some other people, and then of course Marco as well. His Noel's boss. So it was a hostile call with the commissioner, and the commissioner in all likelihood putting pressure on them and saying, what the hell are you doing? You need to be faster, and I don't really care about all your stupid chemical manufacturing controls or whatever else you're doing, because it's totally irrelevant. I mean, she wouldn't have put it in that way, but she was putting pressure on them, at times even a bit unpleasant. And he was probably just being, careful in what he was saying, and it was probably quite unpleasant telephone call. And then he goes on, the real added value of today's telephone call, in my view, is that we have more clarity now on what may not be easily acceptable for the EC, the European Commission. And what is not easily acceptable for the EC, it's a delay of several weeks between an authorization granted by the FDA, MHRA, so that's the British FDA, and a CMA opinion issued by EMA. The political fallout seems to be too high, even if the technical level at the MS, the member states, would, as it was related to by the commissioner, could defend such a delay in order to make the outcome of the scientific review as robust as possible. So it's totally political. He says, look, they don't even want to give us a couple more weeks to do a more thorough job and to clarify some of these really strange issues with batch irregularities, et cetera, et cetera. They won't even give us a few weeks. That's basically what he's saying. And then here, although we know that whatever we do, speeding up the process to align as much as possible with the approval timing, and he put that into quotation marks, the approval timing. So Sasha, you have all this experience approving drugs, right? Is there such a thing as, do people think about it in terms of approval timing? He put it in quotation marks. And I would like to know from you, Sasha, you went through many drug trials in your career as a pharma executive. Is there such a thing as approval timing? I mean, is the question, what is our approval timing? We want to have the drug approved sooner rather than later. Okay, fine. But isn't the real question, is the drug going to be approved? Yes or no?
Exactly. So the timing of the approval is usually concern of the pharmaceutical company. They want to time, they have particular timelines and they want to meet them. The FDA in law specifies only the response times. So, for example, if you submit this application, then they are obligated to respond within 60 days. That's all that FDA can really, the timelines that you can hold FDA to. There's no, here we have everything flipped upside down completely. FDA and EMA and MHRA, all they're concerned is, when are we going to approve this? I've never seen anything like this. And
yes,
especially,
and I guess
like coordination throughout all these agencies.
Yes, exactly. Between the United States, between Britain, and between the EU. And it was all about the approval time being on Christmas or shortly before Christmas, right? That was the idea. That was the goal. That was the goal. And that was all that mattered. And then he goes on to say, approval with the approval timing by FDA, MHRA versus taking the time needed to have robust assurance, in particular as regards CMC, chemical manufacturing controls, and safety. And we will have a very big challenge addressing questions and criticisms from various parties. Who are these parties? It's the European Commission, it's the member states. At a political level, it's the European Parliament, I guess EP stands for. It's the media, it's the general public, because everybody was whipped up in Europe into a frenzy. They were locked down viciously in many countries, really badly. Some, like in Scotland, they weren't even allowed to go out except for to go shopping once a day. It was awful. So people were desperate to get the vaccine into them, and then were able to resume a normal life. The general public, in case of a delay of several weeks, that's all they were talking about. He wasn't even saying we are not going to do it. We don't think it might not even be safe. He wasn't even saying that. He was just talking about a delay of several weeks. And that was apparently totally unacceptable.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then he continues, I mean, what a great email. This is just it's wonderful to have this email. It's like pulling back the curtain and seeing what's going on in there. And then even if it cannot be excluded now that at the end we are aligned with the FDA, MHRA, both in the outcome of the scientific review and the timing. Okay, so he doesn't want to exclude that completely. The opposite certainly cannot be excluded at this moment. So we need to prepare for the worst case scenario, which I guess is that they are not aligned. So how do we go from here? Are the current measures enough? In my view, probably not. We will be overwhelmed from all fronts if we are not aligned and be in the middle of the storm. And then he says this sentence, and on whose support will we be able to count? I hope it will not be a rhetorical question. And of course it is, because he knows very well that he cannot count on the support of anyone. There's nobody there to support them.
Yep. So there, and so that we can do on top without creating the perception that we're interfering outside of our technical mandate. So their technical mandate is to make sure that the CMC documentation is correct and the safety and efficacy. So primarily he's in charge of the CMC, but also then looking at safety and efficacy. So that's the technical mandate of any regulator, is to just review the data. It's not political. And here, again, everything is flipped upside down. They're pushed right into the politics of all of it. The public is whipped into frenzy, and him and his team are being blamed for, you're costing lives. You're putting public in danger by trying to do your job properly.
Yeah, exactly. It's like these guys, they must have been feeling like, when you sit on train tracks. So they're sitting on these train tracks trying, and they see this bullet train, this mRNA bullet train coming at them. And they say, well, wait a minute, you shouldn't proceed past us because we haven't done the controls and the tracks on the other side are unsafe and you might derail or something terrible might happen. And they say, well, what the heck are you telling us? We don't care about your controls and whatever you think. Get out of the way. And by the way, if you don't, then you will have hell to pay, and we are just going to steamroll you.
Yes.
You have absolutely no say in any of this. That was pretty much the situation.
Yeah, and similar thing happened in the U.S. at FDA. That was being done by Peter Marks, the same thing, and he pushed out two key people in charge of safety resigned. Although I don't think they're as blameless as this would show, but in principle it was the same method used by the FDA. So they put enormous pressure on the review teams. Senior people resigned, and Peter Marks took on their jobs and said, now I'm in charge of all of this. And then it was easy after they pushed those people out who were saying this is reckless and the timeline is unrealistic and so forth. So
yeah, Yeah, right. Maybe we should start talking now about the regulatory side of
Right. So
things.
let's see how I can walk you through how they did this bait and switch. So in the EU, and this was also in the emails discussed quite a bit. So there are two regulatory pathways in the EU. One is called CMA, Conditional Marketing Authorization, and another one is called Emergency Use Authorization. It's called Article 5.2 in the EU. And so they were originally, I guess there was a debate, and this is what Noel was bringing up. He said, we need to adapt conditional marketing authorization. So at some point there was a debate: are we going to use EUA pathway, or we're going to use this conditional marketing authorization pathway? In which case we need to adapt it. What the conditional marketing authorization is investigational pathway. So like we were talking about the US PrEP Act and EUA countermeasures, they are non-investigational. The conditional marketing authorization is investigational. In the EU, traditionally, conditional marketing authorization was used for drugs for terminal conditions, some severe terminal conditions such as cancer. Typically, they would use this pathway, which kind of curtails a little bit the regulatory burden and puts some of the obligations on post-market. So let's say, but the chemistry manufacturing controls has always needs to be implemented correctly, and then the safety efficacy claims, additional studies can be postponed to aftermarket, and that's called conditional. So you create these conditions for approval, say, well, I approve if you do so and such things after market. And usually it's strictly controlled, and if the manufacturer doesn't do those obligations or conditions, then the regulator can remove the drug from market. So that's how it's used in normal circumstances. Emergency use pathway, Article 5.2 in EU, is very similar to EUA countermeasures in the US, but the key difference is that it's done by each member state individually. So 27 member states can each issue this Article 5.2 authorization, which doesn't require clinical trials or anything. It's just an authorization. It's issued for emergency for 1 year only. You cannot mandate any of those products. Just like with the EUA countermeasures, you can't mandate any of those products, and each individual member state has authority to revoke this EUA authorization, Article 5.2, by themselves. And that's the part that EU and Emmer Cook and Ursula von der Leyen and all the key leadership there wanted to avoid at all cost. So their whole work was to convince everyone that we're not going to do this Article 5.2 emergency use authorizations by each member state. We're going to go into the EU pathway, which is this conditional marketing authorization. And the way they sold it to everyone was, well, it's much more rigorous, and it's almost like a real approval. And importantly, the liability for product resides with manufacturers. So we can hold manufacturers liable if things go wrong. So
Yes,
so they,
yes, and which is true, which has the added advantage of being true if the CMA is fully enforced.
yes,
Because the liability is with the holder, as you say here, it's the liability is with the holder of the marketing authorization, so the pharmaceutical company, and they have to do these controls. They have to do it even says they have specific obligations, such as to complete or conduct new studies within a defined time period. So it's a pretty good deal, the CMA.
yeah, it sounds like a good deal, and that's how it was sold to the politicians, to the member states. So the commissioner made phone calls herself, convincing them all, twisting their arms to say, no, don't do this EUA. We're going to do the CMA, the pan-EU approval. Don't worry about it. It's all going to be simultaneously timed for all the 27 states, and we are going to hold manufacturers liable. Everybody said, yeah, great, good idea. Then the leadership goes to people like Noel Wathian, and they say, oh, now you have to adapt this CMA pathway for us to approve it faster than Christmas. Noel starts throwing, tearing his hair out and say, this is impossible, what you're asking me to do. And they put a huge amount of pressure on him and his team, start putting out these articles saying, you're costing lives, you're a killer, granny killer, blah, blah, blah. And that's how they adopted the pathway. So Noel eventually gives up, and whatever they're saying, the reviewers are just going to wave through. And in addition to that, the final step was, of course, for them to now waive all of those liability protections and the requirement to comply with pharmaceutical law through the contracts. So that was the final puzzle piece, was that those contracts that then Ursula von der Leyen supposedly negotiated with Albert Bourla by text message, and nobody has ever seen any of these text messages since.
Right. Yeah. And but before you go there, I want to ask you this, because I think this is really important for understanding what's going on here. So we have these two pathways. We have the CMA, the Conditional Marketing Authorization, which has pretty robust liability protection and controls and all that. And then on the other hand, we have this emergency use authorization, like in the United States, which actually which removes, as it says here, it removes the administrative and civil liability from the manufacturer and marketing authorization holder. Okay, so, and as you just said, Ursula von der Leyen, she was very much involved in this, and she wanted to make sure that the CMA path was chosen and not the EUA. And my question to you is, why was she so keen on avoiding the emergency use authorization pathway?
Well, number one is because you can't mandate those products under EUA. So if they're officially issued on the market through Article 5.2, there's no way to mandate them.
Okay.
So that was number one. Number two was because that gives authority to each individual member state to do whatever they want. And if, let's say, the products start being shipped in one country and they produce a whole bunch of adverse events and deaths, the government says, I don't want it, and they remove it. That's it. So that their scam falls apart.
Yes, and I think that's key, because there you have 27 EU member states, and each one of them would have to. It's a national. This EUA is a national thing. It can't be proclaimed by the European Union. Every individual state has to proclaim the emergency use authorization, and I think it's also only valid for 1 year, and you can withdraw it, you can drop it earlier if you want. So, but what's crucial here, I think, is that it would have put the individual country, the individual EU member in charge. And that is something that the European Commission wanted to avoid at all costs, because this was all about controlling the entire 27 member states from the top, from the European Commission, and to put them under their restrictions, and to make sure that they would have to do whatever the European Commission decided. So I think this is really crucial to understand, because the EU, of course, is kind of like an authoritarian structure that is trying to take, and very successfully so has taken, a lot of the national decision making away from the individual states, and has accumulated them in the European Commission with a parliament that is even not a real parliament. It's just like some sort of a fake parliament that they have there. Okay, so this is the reason they went with the CMA. But then, as you already said, they had to undermine the CMA. They had to just kind of keep it as a shell, but take all the things that make the CMA safe. They had to remove all of the stuff. They had to remove the CMCs became a joke, and anything else was just completely undermined. And then you just mentioned the predatory contracts.
Contracts, yeah. So adapting the CMA was to remove the CMC, which is the key of the safety. And then, the final thing was basically, this is a clause. I mean, it's one of the clauses, but this is probably the most telling. from those contracts that Ursula then turned around and made all the member states now sign these purchase agreements, which completely waive all those liability protections and securities that she was promising to them in the first place. And in addition to, so the purchasers, each individual country, were supposed to indemnify Pfizer, hold them harmless against all suits. And to hold them harmless and indemnify them, they had to put state assets as collateral. So in case the citizens, the injured citizens of the country sue the government and win in that lawsuit for liabilities, then or sue Pfizer in that country, sorry, and win, then the government of the country has to pay that liability fee, not Pfizer. And in order to insure it, the government had to put state assets as collateral. So when I saw those contracts, it immediately occurred to me Pfizer wasn't in charge of those contracts, because Pfizer cannot force presumably sovereign entities, governments, to suspend their lawful legislative making authority, which is what this contract does. The only entity in the world who can do it is the one who holds most of the guns and nuclear weapons, which is the United States and its Department of Defense.
So what you have here basically is a PrEP Act in miniature. This is basically the PrEP Act, what this one sentence here.
Yeah.
Indemnify, defend, hold harmless Pfizer from it against any and all suits. So I guess the likelihood of suing Pfizer successfully is zero. Claims, actions, demands, losses, damages, liabilities, settlements, penalties, fine costs, and expenses arising out of, relating to, or resulting from the vaccine. There is your PrEP Act equivalent. And state assets, you said state assets. What are state assets?
Well, state assets is military bases, government buildings, embassy buildings, money, anything the state owns. So
probably land that the state owns.
Yeah, all state assets need to be pledged so that this indemnification can happen. So it's insane. These contracts are insane.
Have you ever seen a contract like that before?
No. And as I've been saying, not even the first year law student would sign up to something like this. And here we have 27 governments with their high-profile attorneys signing up, no problem, to these clauses.
Why did they do that?
Well, as I said, because the entity who is forcing them to sign these contracts is not Pfizer. It's not Pfizer. It's the US government and its Department of Defense.
So for Europe, do you have any proof, any documents, anything that would prove that point?
That this contract, well,
yeah.
I mean, we profiled in our COVID dossier the clear evidence that in Europe, this operation is a military operation coordinated via NATO. So this is probably coordinated through DoD, NATO, and the governments were forced to sign these.
Yeah,
under national security frameworks and stuff like that.
Yeah, actually, let's go to this. Let's have a look at this, since we are talking about the connection to the military here. There is this Bundeswehr. So the Bundeswehr is the German army, and there is this Bundeswehr distribution center in Quakenbrück, I think it was. Yeah. And it's a transshipment center. What is going on with this transshipment center here?
Yeah, so this is an article that was on the German ministry, military, their equivalent of the DoD, Bundeswehr. Yeah. And,
yeah, exactly.
And so it was on their website until we linked it to our dossier, and then they immediately removed it. So I relinked. This is from archive webpage. And this says that for Germany, but I'm pretty sure this is for all EU also, all vaccines came through this military NATO distribution center. So that's another one, another tell signs that this is a military operation, because this NATO distribution facility, why are they processing presumably pharmaceutical medicinal products for civilians? In the NATO transshipment facility, obviously, they are not compliant with the pharmaceutical distribution import export laws. because they're shipping typically weapons. And so not for consumer use, obviously. But here, they're somehow in charge of all of the distribution of all of the vaccines for Germany.
Yeah, and look at the number they've been handling here. It says, so the fleet pharmacist says by October 2021, we had handled a total of 90 million vaccine doses. So Germany has about 80 million citizens. But the countries bought way more. I think Germany bought enough vaccines to vaccinate every single citizen, like something like 10 times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most countries in the world bought 10 doses per each citizen. This is the same for Australia, same for Canada and for United States.
That was completely, I mean, I don't understand that at all, because of course the virus mutated and then they changed the vaccines. That didn't make any sense.
Well, because it doesn't matter. Those virus mutations and things, they don't matter. The poison is the same poison. They were planning to inject everyone 10 times. And this is, so you see, by October 2021. So when they were claiming that it's only one vaccination will prevent you having COVID and you only need to have one vaccine, they're already purchasing 10 times what they need, right?
Yeah. So, and then they also say here, in the course of foreign aid, corona vaccines have also been sent from Quakenbrück, this transshipment center in Germany, to Egypt, Ghana, Namibia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Ukraine in recent months.
Yep.
And for those of you who are German, or I couldn't believe that. Look at this thing here, Sasha. Versinsetsanmat. I said, what the hell is that? Head of the Versinsetsanmat. This is like a joke, trying to come up with the worst acronym for this transshipment center. So I looked it up. I looked it up on the German website. In German. Where is it? Let's put it back there. And it says here, the name of this thing it's an awful name. Versorgungs- und Instandsetzungszentrum Sanitätsmaterial. I mean, talk about butchering a beautiful language. It's awful. And then they abbreviated it into this monster, Versinsetsanmat. Well, it's totally beside the point, but I just thought, wow. Maybe that was meant as a joke. I mean, it's just too awful. Okay, so that was this weird transshipment center that was all done by the army. Have you ever? Is there any other case that you know where the army was in charge of distributing vaccines
for civilian vaccines? No.
Yeah, of course for civilian vaccines.
No. And no, they don't even have authority. The military doesn't really have authority to. This is what Debbie Lerman wrote about when she wrote about why HHS in the U.S. merged with the DoD for this purpose. That was specifically to overcome their limitations of their respective authorities, because the Department of Defense does not have authority to buy mass, 90 million doses, 100 million doses, mass-produced vaccines for civilians, or order or buy or produce or ship or do anything with. And the HHS cannot use these prototype demonstration clauses in OTAs, so they merged so that they could order through OTA mass-produced pharmaceutical products for civilians and have it distributed through the military.
Now, what was interesting here, look at this here. They had some challenges, they say here in this article. The vaccine distribution center is going on an application for administrative assistance of the Federal Ministry of Health in October 2020. And there was a challenge there, the first challenge. Due to the military medical care of the soldiers, the Bundeswehr had a pharmacy operating license. That makes sense, but not a wholesale license for pharmaceutical products, which makes also sense, because why should the Bundeswehr, the German army, have a wholesale pharmacy operating license, right? However, this license was necessary to be able to operate the vaccine distribution center. So in other words, this just proves what you just said, that this in Germany, the Bundeswehr was never before in charge of distributing a vaccine to tens of millions of civilians. And then there's a quote here: without a wholesale license under EU law, the Bundeswehr is not allowed to issue medicines or vaccines to civilian distribution centers, even in administrative assistance. So in other words, this was impossible. And this is this Oberfeldapotheker Harder, who was called up to do this. Okay, and then now look at this. How did they solve that problem? That's how they solved it. However, the Verst-Ins-Z-San-Mats Quakenbrück had recently revised its revised its quality management according to DIN ISO 9001. Harder says the certification according to GDP, the Good Distributing Practice Guideline of the European Union, wasn't. So this is apparently what this is. This DIN ISO 9001 guideline of the European Union was an indispensable prerequisite for the application. Among other things, we were able to demonstrate the experience of our medical team in handling medicines in refrigerated container storage and draw on many process steps that have already been certified. So without that recent change, and it was probably changed, well, I mean, I'm just guessing here, or I'm speculating here, but it might very well have been changed in order to achieve exactly this, that the Bundeswehr and maybe, I don't know, the French army or the British army, it was probably similar there, were able to distribute the vaccines from their distribution centers.
Yeah.
What do you say?
Yeah, this is the same as I was saying between HHS and DOD. They have limitations. So like DOD cannot administer vaccines and doesn't have a license for mass distribution of medicinal products to civilians. The same thing here. The Bundeswehr couldn't, but then they made this. Oh, we've certified, and now we have the license. Okay.
Yeah, and look at this. And they did it really fast. I think this is fast. The result after numerous night shifts.
Yeah.
So they applied. They worked a couple of nights to complete this application.
Yeah.
And then the application was approved within 3 weeks.
Wow. That's just.
I would say that's fast. I think that's pretty fast. Because this is a big deal. They are giving them a wholesale pharmacy operating license, a wholesale license for pharmaceutical products to the army for everyone, not just for soldiers. That's a really big deal, and they did it in 3 weeks.
In 3 weeks, you couldn't even do an audit. So, like the actual, if this was a real issuance of a wholesale pharmacy license, it would involve an audit. But in 3 weeks, you can't.
Yes.
You can't do an audit.
Yeah. Right. So let's see what else do we need to talk about. I think we covered a lot of stuff already, but let me just have a look. Well, one thing that I thought was really interesting, that Ursula von der Leyen was so intimately involved in this. Apparently, she claims that she negotiated these contracts by text messages with Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer. And then she says that she subsequently lost them. I mean, the whole thing sounds so crazy. First of all, you don't negotiate such things by text message, but even why would she do that? She doesn't know anything about negotiating contracts. However, she had been Secretary of the Defense in Germany from 2013 to 2019.
Oh, okay. That explains.
Oh yeah. She had a good. I mean, she knew the military. What is going on there with these text messages, negotiating these contracts by text message?
Well, the contracts, as I said, there was no negotiation. These were pre-written, probably in preparation to this fake pandemic exercise. They were pre-written, and they were just given to her to validate them this way. And the reason we haven't seen them yet. So again, it's ridiculous. There've been numerous investigations. I believe there's one investigation ongoing right now into this whole situation with the contracts and her text messages, but she still there's been no accountability, because again, this is all driven from the militaries of countries coordinating this attack on people, and she's never going to be held liable by anyone.
So do you think then that Ursula von der Leyen, so the president of the European Commission, and she still is president of the European Commission, was under order of NATO?
Yeah, likely. Yeah. and given liability protection as well.
You know, you have this list of names and email addresses from the EMA leaks. I just want to show people very quickly. I'm just going to share my screen because you can just go into Sasha's article, and I'm going to put the link underneath this interview. But I want to show you what she did because I'm hoping that somebody will feel called upon to investigate this further. So here you see what she did. She read through the 1,000 pages of these leaked documents and emails. She pulled out the names. She also found quite a few emails, and she put the organization for whom these people are working, and also the function, the departments where the documents were mentioned. And look at this. There's a ton of stuff in there. There are also where our EMA co-rapporteurs, they had assessors. See, there are these EMA assessors. They are all here. Quite a few assessors. So it's all in here. Just wanted to show that. Okay.
Yeah. I'm hoping anyone, somebody can step forward as a whistleblower. It's high time to tell what happened.
Yes. Yeah. So you say that in one of the articles, you say that the entire vaccine approval is a fake theater, and I think we have proven that this was true in the European Union as well.
Yeah, exactly. It was just managed for the public to believe that this is a approved medicinal product, where in fact none of this mattered for the approval. They were going to launch them anyway. They pre-purchased the vaccines way before any of the reviewers ever seen any data. And also in the US, I know for sure there were about 33 batches of Pfizer vaccine that was manufactured starting in June of 2020. So way before this November or December timeline. So they started manufacturing them around June of 2020. Finished those 33 batches were manufactured by end of November 2020. And after the EU authorization, they were shipped commercially. So this and those batches contained around 30 million doses. And those was very, very toxic. So that just proves that 30 million doses were sitting on the shelf and clinical trials had no impact on them whatsoever. It didn't matter. They were already made. And after the paperwork was issued, they went on the market and they killed a whole bunch of people. They were very, very toxic. And by the way, those batches also in the expiration date, because the government knows that these are outside of anything. These are just poisons made. So their expiration date is December 31st, 2069. They're labeled with 69. 2069 is their expiration date of those 33 batches.
2069, was that why on earth 2069? Doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make any sense to me either, but that's not how you label expiration dates. It's just to say that these are completely outside of any norm of anything. And it's been FOIA'd by ICANN, by Aaron Siri. They FOIA'd Pfizer shipment, detailed shipment information. And I also worked with that to adjust my batch analysis. And that's where I saw, so I knew about these batches, I wrote about them, but they didn't have their expiration dates until they FOIA'd this data. And I looked at it and I'm like, oh, well.
That's just totally nuts. Yeah. What were the doctors thinking when they saw that expiration date?
They didn't care. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. They were paid to inject people. They injected people. They collected their money. They injected themselves. A bunch of them are dead and injured, and nobody cared.
Mm-hmm. So you already said that in the United States, we are still under EUA for the mRNA COVID shots. And in Europe or in the European Union, I assume that the mRNA COVID shots are still under this CMA adapted thing. Right.
Yes. Yeah. CMA adapted, and the same as in the US. The EMA is lying that they're fully approved now because the line is legal, and they're just doing the same thing as the FDA.
Also, the EU, the EMA is now just saying, "Oh, we are fully approved, and
Yeah,
we followed all the."
they did the same. They eventually issued full approval, just like FDA did for in late 2021.
Based on what?
And they also there were conditions of this conditional marketing approval
Right.
that were never met.
Yes.
And
Yes.
EMA just said, "Oh well, we don't want it anymore. It's fine."
So in the US, there have been lots of lawsuits, and all of them have been repelled. Oh, PrEP Act, go home. And just now we saw with the Grace Shara trial, even there, where you clearly had the misdeeds of doctors breaking the do not resuscitate order, giving her cocktails that were just euthanization cocktails. It was like the MAID protocol, and it sounded like assisted suicide. Except for that she didn't want to be. She didn't want to be killed. Despite everything, not even in that particular case, anything was achieved. The jury just said no, it was okay. But in the European Union, how many lawsuits have happened there, and are there any successes?
No, I haven't followed how many lawsuits. I mean, I know there are some in the European Union. Same thing. They can't get anywhere. Actually, just recently there was somebody posted on X. They did the FOIA. So I was involved early on. If you recall, there was an effort to bring criminal investigations in the UK to the Metropolitan Police. And I worked with the lawyers and people who were doing that effort. We've compiled in 2022, 2021, 2022, compiled a lot of data. I submitted my affidavit with the batch variability assessment at the time, and this information from EMA as well. And we got nowhere. It was thousands of pages. People went to the police stations, specifically providing the evidence. The Metropolitan Police initially issued criminal investigation number, pretending that they're doing something about it. But then they said, "Oh no, we haven't found anything, no evidence of any malfeasance," and so that was closed. So now, just now, I saw this FOIA that was delivered from I think from Scottish. They got it from Scottish police. And it said specifically that they received the communications from the London Metropolitan Police that any requests or inquiries around these, vaccines, adverse events of vaccines, and poisonings with vaccines should be disregarded and discarded.
Should be disregarded and discarded. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were given specifics of police offices everywhere, and we know this for the U.S. as well. There were similar efforts being done in the U.S. With a group of people who were like lawyers who were trying to bring the evidence to the individual, like sheriff's offices and police departments, and they were universally stonewalled everywhere. In some places, even the sheriff would shut down the station, run out the back door to not meet with these people, because everyone was given instructions from national security state that do not look into this. And I'm sure the judicial system was given exactly the same instructions. That's why what happened in Grace Shara's case. I don't know what they told to the jurors, but the jurors deliberating less than an hour on a case like this and coming back with the verdict that your doctor can put DNR on you without your knowledge.
Yeah.
Of course, they received some instructions to the same.
Yes, I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did. Thank you so much, Sasha.
Thank you for inviting me.